Salvation Army going on 13 years, coming up in 6 days, so that's pretty interesting. But before that, I was in the United States Air Force, spent 12 years there. The last few years I was in the Air Force, I actually taught sergeant's class, leadership class, and they sent me to Air University, and I received an associate's in adult learning. So to come here today, it's pretty exciting that I can share some of the theories and some of the things I learned and teaching adults, and hopefully that will be able to take that back and be able to utilize some of this material, because I believe a lot of what's in for adults is what's in it for me, right? As you got up here today, as you're traveling here on a Saturday to give up a few hours of your day, you're thinking about what's in it for me, right? I'm giving up this amount of time, and hopefully I can receive something that's worth the time I'm investing.
That's right.
Sunday school. When you wake up, you're like, should I sit here and eat some more breakfast, right? Or is that Sunday school gonna be worth that extra hour that I got at my house? And if you can say, yes, that I receive something more than that hour, then people show up for Sunday school. But if they don't receive what's in it for me, then it's a hard sale for adults, because that's how we're wired. That's normal thinking, right? What's in it for me? So as Sunday school teachers, while we're preparing for our lessons, while we're preparing for our teaching, you got to think about, is it worth the hour someone shows up an hour early before Sunday? Is it worth my time to show up? Am I receiving what it's worth of my time to show up for Sunday school? It's a very good thought to think about, because sometimes we show up to things and we walk away discouraged because we did not receive what our time was worth. But before we get going too far, Evie, thank you for doing this. I appreciate that. If you go down, if you scroll down, I want to show you these numbers. You can see a 120, a 132, a 124, and all these numbers. And a teacher, this case study, this story that I'm going to talk about today, is about these numbers. So there was a high school teacher, showed up, taught for a week, and he went to the principal and he says, you know what? You're not paying me enough to deal with these kids. I quit. So the principal was like, oh man, we're the first week into school, I have no teacher. So a substitute teacher showed up, and the principal said to himself, I'm not going to talk about how bad these students are. He said, I'm just going to hand them this sheet of paper with these numbers on it. The average IQ is from 90 to 109, all right? So average IQ is from 90 to 109, and all these numbers here are above 109. True? True. So the substitute teacher took this list, went into his class, and that's the last time the principal saw him, right? All of a sudden, 3 months later, he's like, wow, that substitute teacher hasn't quit. He's been showing up every day. I haven't seen any problems from his kids. Pretty cool, right? That's what you want to see as a principal.
Yeah.
So the principal decided to call that substitute teacher, and he says, what's going on here? He said, I just pulled the results from all those kids' tests, and he says, they're horrible kids. He said, they're substandard, they're problematic, and he says, here they are getting B's and A's, and I haven't seen any problems. And the substitute teacher was like, whoa, wait a minute. He says, you gave me this sheet with all these kids' IQ numbers on them. And he says, I went in there and he says, I was teaching high-level education. And the principal's like, hold up a minute. He said, those are not IQ numbers. He said, those are locker numbers. But there's a principle behind that. right? Because sometimes we don't teach to the level that we should be teaching to. And I'll tell you, adult learners will rise to that level if you teach hard enough and you teach high enough. And sometimes we go in with milk when we should be teaching meat. And you think that they won't rise to that occasion because they're problematic or they're not what you think that a high IQ to. Don't do that. Don't do that, people, because people will rise to that level. My daughter, Ryan Porter, can you say hi? So I said that I've been with the Salvation for 13 years. In 6 days, she's going to be 13. Wow. I actually did an interview the day after she was born to be part of the Salvation Army as an employee.
Oh, wow.
So that's how I remember that I've been part of the Salvation Army for 13.
Wow.
But it's very interesting about adult learnings because I went and I was teaching at a CSRC, a recovery program, teaching life skills. And when I went in there, it was a DOC program. There were younger adults, and they were one strike away from doing felony time, right? They were court ordered to the program of the Salvation Army. And I went in there and I taught bachelor and master level material. And guess what happened? They rose to the level of what I taught. They actually went in there and they were excited to be there because what's in it for me? Right? They knew the value of what I was teaching. And they were willing to put themselves aside and show up and receive the teaching that I was there to do. All right, next slide, Evie. Let's talk about how to raise our level of teaching. There's an adult learning theorem. It's called Bloom's taxonomy. There's a cognitive, affective, and psychomotor different levels that you can teach. I'm just going to talk about the cognitive level today. This is for adult learning. The lowest level that we can teach as adults is remembering, which is the lowest level. That's just knowledge. And then the bottom is, can the student recall or remember the information? That would be able to define, duplicate, list, memorize, recall, repeat, reproduce, or state. That is the lowest level of teaching for adults, where we just sit there and we read a book and we give them knowledge. And then at the end of the hour we say, what did you learn? And they're like, well, we're in the book of Genesis. That is low-level learning. Would I be willing to give up that extra hour when I can drink my coffee and have that Dunkin' Donut one more time before I get to the service, where all I receive is a low form of level of teaching at our Sunday schools? We've all been there before, haven't we? Where someone got up and just read a book. Now, I'm not saying that's not okay. All right, that's not, don't hear what I'm not saying. But it's the lowest form of adult learning. Then we can move up to understanding, where can the student explain ideas and concepts? That would be able to classify, describe, discuss, explain, identify, locate, recognize, report, select, translate, or paraphrase. That's a good place to be. How many people have been in a Sunday school where they were asked, what do you think about that? Can you apply that knowledge that we're learning from into your day-to-day life? When we start going from expecting just basic knowledge up to the point where people can start applying it, that's when we start moving into an associate level mentality. That's associate's level in a college, is where people can read something and then they can apply it by writing a paper about it, right? That's kind of how associate's levels in adult learning is the standard. Can they explain ideas? Now, why is that important in our Sunday schools for them to explain what's going on and what they're receiving for information? Because eventually, we want them to do what? Go. We want them to go and teach. We want them to go and talk about this information that they're receiving to their neighbor. And this is where it starts becoming part of your testimony. All right? A lot of times we get to the point where we hear we need to give more testimonies. But if we're not teaching to the level of testimony, then we'll never have people speaking their testimony. The next level is bachelor level. That's where can the student use the information in a new way? They'd be able to choose, demonstrate, dramatize, employ, illustrate, interpret, operate, sketch, solve, use, or write. They can start applying it. They can take the information that we're giving to them in Sunday school and they can apply it in their life. When you start seeing your core members through a Bible study start applying the information you're sending through Sunday school, that means you're hitting a higher level of education. Usually at this level, most people are like, good. Right? I can see that people are receiving information. They can come back with the basic information. They're starting to figure out how to apply it. That's usually your bachelor level. Analyzing, when you start getting up to analyzing, evaluating, that's more of a case study. All right? That's a good check on your people. Telling them a story, such as Joseph, is a case study. Can you extract information out of the story of Joseph? What's some things that we can extract out of Joseph? Let's open it up real quick. What's some lessons that we can learn out of Joseph?
Perception of when he was deceived, how he took it.
Okay. How he was deceived. What's some other lessons from Joseph?
Patience and trust.
Patience and trust, right? What's some other things we've got? Yeah.
I was going to say trust God's heart when you can't see his hand.
Right. Why would you say that? Keep going on that a little bit.
Because you could be in circumstance. Joseph was in a circumstance where he couldn't understand why God allowed this to happen to him.
That's right.
In his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. And he could not understand why God would allow him to be sold into slavery and to get betrayed by Potiphar's wife and wind up in prison for something he didn't do.
Yeah, why God?
And he had to trust him. He had to trust him that God knew what he was doing. God has seen the end of the movie, so we had to trust him.
Yeah, we have to trust God. Yes, ma'am.
Attitude.
How so?
He had the right attitude.
He had the right attitude of what? What's the attitude? Keep going. Give me an example of your life when you had that attitude of Joseph. When you had to push through something hard.
I have several things, but
Come on, testify now.
when I had to make arrangements for my children and educate myself more, because I knew the end result was what I wanted.
Yes.
It was not easy.
Testimony. Hallelujah. Thank you. Right? This is what we're looking for. The byproduct of a Sunday school is to get the people to talk about testimonies. Because in the Salvation Army, what are we built on? But if we can't pull information, if we don't know how to apply it and how to pull information from Joseph out of our own lives, then we'll never be able to give a testimony. See how exciting this is when you start hitting higher levels of information, of education, and when we start treating adults like adults, they're going to start showing up that hour before Sunday service. Because it's what's in it for me. What's in it for me is I'm going to learn how to take my life stories, use the principles of Joseph, and be able to go out and we're going to be able to tell people that Jesus is faithful. That Joseph is faithful. And when we're faithful and we're going through the hard stuff, that we can see God's hand in our life. So it's so much fun to be able to sit here and look at Bloom's taxonomy. You guys can Google it. There's lots of it out there, right? And there's information on how to hit higher levels of teaching for adults. When we start treating adults like adults, we're going to start getting different behaviors. Because it's very easy, because most of us have learned what? Growing up in high school, how we were taught. We didn't get taught higher levels of teaching. But we have to challenge ourselves as local leaders to really dig into how to get a higher level. Well, we can start looking at case studies, and that's a testimony. When someone stands up and says, "This is my testimony," we should be able to listen to that testimony and be able to extract the biblical principles out of it. And maybe that's a good lesson learned, right? Allow someone to get up and stand up and say, "This is my testimony," and then you round table it and say, "Okay, is there any Jesus in this, or is this all them?" I was just kidding. That was funny.
You know, Joseph, to me, Joseph was strong in the end of the story because he began to believe in what God was telling him.
So he was stronger because he believed in what God was telling him. When in your life, Ray, have you became stronger once you started believing what God was telling you?
When I was
Okay?
when I saw the light, I knew he was there. I knew he was real into my life. He had came into my life. He actually saved me from the past that I was taking
Yeah.
in life. And God will do that when you begin to call on him. He will step in and intervene sometimes. But you have to call on